Good. Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. It is Friday, Yahoo! April 7th. And we are addressing sports betting. And we have had the benefit of a terrific task force this summer working on it with two of our committee members, I believe. Or Randy, did you not do it? Was it just Keisha?
With what?
Keisha, was it, you were our representative
Sears.
on the.
Me and Sears.
Yeah, Dick Sears and Keisha were on it. And so today we've had a walkthrough of it with Tucker. And today we're going to get a boot up, a tee up by its reporter, the reporter of the bill on the House floor. And then we are going to dive into witnesses on it. So Matt Byron is going to lead off with teeing us up on it and addressing. Yes, absolutely. Welcome, Matt Byron.
Thank you, Senator and Senators. Madam Chair, how are we doing?
She's
I'm good.
great.
It's nice to see you.
She looks terrific. And she can see you right there because she,
Oh,
Right.
Perfect,
So
I
you
got it.
talk
Like
to
right
her
there.
there.
She's not there, but
Yeah.
I'm here. Yeah, got
so
it.
you
Yeah.
she may be behind you, but she's actually
Sorry.
you're right in her.
It's like
face.
a genius
We're good.
if you
She's
are.
always got my back. I know that.
She,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah,
what?
really. That's fine.
Anyway, it's good to see everyone. I think this is the first time I've been in here this session,
Well, it is good.
which is
to have.
strange because I feel like I've been here a lot in the past years.
You have,
Yeah.
but you've just switched committees of jurisdiction.
Yeah. So it's
And
really
you
just a
travel
DLO
with
now.
Vice, we noticed.
I do. I am now the vice of vice because we have cannabis and DLO, and all of that fun stuff. Sports wagering. Yeah,
And funny, we have that too.
I know. This is I get to see it. I'm
We'll see
excited.
you again. then.
So please give us your tee us up on 127,
Okay.
what you did, what you didn't do, what you felt was most important, how the task force informed your work, the whole 9 yards.
Yes. So I was also on the task force on the study committee
okay.
with Representative Odie. We were the two members of the House on the working group. And essentially, I guess sort of my journey with this started in 2019 when the Senate was more noodling on the idea. And at that time, Speaker Johnson wanted somebody to really immerse themselves in the subject matter to start to understand it, because we all saw that the roads were sort of heading in this direction. So I guess this is sort of we're creeping up on the end of a long homework project for me. So with that, both Speaker Kerensky and former Speaker Johnson had essentially asked me if we were going to go down this path, make sure that there was notable revenue for the state, and also make sure that there were robust protections for problem gaming, education, prevention, etc. And so with that, the summer study committee, we met a significant amount of times. I want to say we met about 12 times. And we really did take a hard look at what other states were doing for prevention, treatment, etc. We took a lot of testimony from people within that sector, both professionally, nonprofit, academics, what have you. And you'll see that with the witness lists that were shared from our committee to your committee. And I think the product that we have in front of us is it's a solid piece. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't work to be done on it by this committee, this chamber, but it really was the product of a diligent 3 years of exploration. And the DLL has been a great partner in this. Commissioner Knight has been very attentive to all of these needs as well, because I believe the administration shares the same desires. We're taking this element out of criminal enterprises, out of the darker spheres, much like retail cannabis. So, we're just trying to do this in the most pragmatic and responsible way, because yes, it is still vice. Within that, you mentioned that you already did a run through with Tucker on a section by section. So as far as that, one of the more notable things we did towards the end was we decided to elevate the crimes and penalties section Originally for non-licensed operators, the fine structure was 10,000 for the first offense, 6 months imprisonment, 25,000 on the second, 1 year imprisonment, or excuse me, up to, yeah,
For those of us,
we elevated.
that's a
those.
pretty high. So what page is your?
Oh, we actually elevated that was where I was going. Those were the original fine structures. And so in the bill itself, I have that here, I was just working off a summary.
Oh, it's okay, you just speak.
The crime and penalties section. So what the rationale behind that fine structure escalation was you still have the offshore operators, you still have people running, we'll call them nefarious websites. And we saw some situations in other states where the penalty didn't suit. You know, I kind of zoomed out and took a look at how the SEC deals with hedge funds and whatnot, right? Make an $8 million or $80 million trade that's sketchy, you get fined $2 million. The boss just looks at his crew and says, "Good job, team. We cleared 78 million." So I wanted to take that into consideration after certain aspects of testimony we received from other states where their fine structure was not punitive enough to deter that behavior. So that's why you saw that elevated fine structure.
And on enforcement, this is why we're hearing, I believe, from at some point, either today or later, we're hearing about from the digital crowd that can actually monitor this in any kind of effective way within several feet of the state line, I understand.
Oh, geo-comply?
Yeah, geo-comply. So,
Yes.
I mean, it's in terms of enforcement, is your idea that the state would hire geo-comply?
Geo-comply is not really an enforcement entity. It's more about knowing that people are wagering within your state boundaries or not.
But
And
isn't that the enforcement we would need to make this work?
what I'm talking yes and no. So what GeoComply does is like they were the ones who showed us a lot of data through heat maps and other points to show how many Vermonters were driving over borders to like place that's New Hampshire or New York. And so they know through your devices, through your VPN, where you are when you're placing the order, right? So are they the enforcement mechanism themselves? No. Are they a resource to know what's going on? Yes.
So do they enable or disable a bet depending on where you're physically located?
I think what would happen there, that's a question for them. I don't think,
Okay.
I'm going to say, I don't think so. I think that's still up to the operator to do that. But they work
Okay.
with the operators.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, large picture. Anything else that you want us to know about sports betting? What is, and remind us what the robust revenue that Mitzi charged you to find?
So right now, once it's totally ramped up, 3-ish years, $10 to $15 million a year for the state is the estimate. I would say that first 3 years, I'm always a set lower expectations and be happy when you exceed kind of person. You know, I'd be happy to see 10 to 12 million over the first 3 years as it ramps up total. Because it's going to be a little slow. Yeah, I think we do 3 to 5 in the first year, and then like a 4 to 7, kind of a thing, and then we'll start hitting the stride after that. And that is just all based on projections. So.
And how long did you find it took other states to ramp up?
About 3 years.
So that's why we have a 3-year ramp up.
Yeah.
Great.
And again, we've been analyzing states through different reports, and we had Tucker do a massive report 2 years ago, and the data it's such a young market nationally that the data is just constantly evolving. So when you think you've got like a hard data set to lean into, 6 months later it's just completely changed. So this industry is very much so moving forward as far as understanding the financial mechanisms and revenue streams.
Right, and they are changing constantly.
Yes.
Questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Yeah, well, just a little bit about the penalties and how you do the enforcement, and some of this might be for the other person, I guess.
So I mean, I can speak
But,
to it a little bit. Yes.
So it's 25,000 first violation, 75 for second violation.
Yes. So we beefed that up. to.
Oh, so this is,
Hold on, let me make sure I'm using my words correctly.
Okay.
Yes, we beefed it up.
So
We are,
what-
we are at the 2575 150 structure currently. That was what we.
So what section? Sorry.
That is.
well, it's
the-
page 16.
Okay,
And then,
there it is.
Yeah,
so that's for operator.
1325. That is for non-licensed operators and operators.
And
So,
is that, so, no, I'm sorry, I haven't, it's a little bit, we looked at it a few weeks ago. So the operator is who owns or controls the website that the person ultimately gambles on.
That is licensed. Yes. So in the
So,
bill, when we
Okay.
refer to an operator, the operator is the licensed entity that the state of Vermont to operate.
okay,
And then we have like the unlicensed operators.
and so the unlicensed operators, how do you manage those or enforce those?
I mean, like anything else in the dark world, it's like typically just by complaints, we'll find out about them, or, you know, that would be a better question for the DLL. on how
Okay.
They would source that, but that stuff is typically complaint driven, or somebody's like, hey, this website's operating, Vermonters are doing this. But that would be a deeper question for.
And that's the situation that we have now, right? It's just the
Yeah.
illegal operators.
It's operating in the dark.
And is it illegal here now?
Mhm.
Okay,
That's
so,
the problem
so,
we're trying to solve. Because we
got it.
get,
Sorry, this is probably a dumb question.
no, that's
No,
okay. We
there are
covered it
dumb
last.
questions.
We,
Alright.
we commissioned these committees commissioned the task force that did the work that that
Right.
resulted in this legislation. And Ann and Wendy, you know, were part of it, but that's why we're here.
Right.
And we've
I-
been looking at this now for 5 to 6 years. And this is as far as we've actually gotten
Yes.
after a long effort of particularly of Sorokin and Sears. And Tucker, who has invested huge pieces of his life in this.
Yes.
And maybe Chris Rice too, who's invested a lot of his life too. So Michael, I have a question, and we can ask Wendy this, but anyway, I'll wait and ask Wendy. I'm gonna be very
How
restrained.
much revenue do we think is going to go? I guess the 10 to 15 is based on the revenue that the operators will get.
Yeah.
No, that 10 to 15 is what we project the state of Vermont will have.
Right,
Yes.
I understand that, but isn't it some sort of percentage of what they'll get?
Yes, and so like you'll see that, so that's, and this is something that I think the commissioner can like describe more in depth, because we're doing a bid process with the licenses.
Yes,
And part of that bid process is them proposing what percentage they will remit to the state of Vermont. And we put a floor of 20% in,
yeah, and then there's tiers. I'm
and then it can
remembering that now.
exceed.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's like kind of, if you want one of our 2 to 6 licenses, give us the best deal.
right. So there is an amount that the population of Vermont would generate that would be typical of what others would generate, other states in terms of per person.
I guess, I don't
I
think
mean,
I've ever.
someone somewhere
Yeah,
has
and
that.
JFO has
Yeah,
on Q,
okay, that's funny.
has a lot of those
Okay.
numbers to mine down into that. I would do a disservice to his work if I started getting that
Yeah,
nerdy.
So
yeah. All right, well, I
nerdy, there's
can ask-
nothing nerdy about Patrick.
I say nerdy with like the utmost
With affection.
love and affection, yes.
Okay.
Love nerds, we're all nerds. That's why.
So Matt, thank you. I think you have teed us up well. The issues, it sounds like you set us on a productive path. So thank you
Yes,
very much. If anything else occurs to you, let us know.
I certainly will, and you know where to find me. And
We do.
yeah, no, good luck with this. And no, I think this is
And all the other vices you sent us.
yes,
And
we'll
I
talk
wanna know-
270, we'll talk 470, we'll talk all the 70s.
And
Yes.
are you running the baby betting pool for baby Ron Hinsdale?
No, I was not running the
We
little
have 2
side.
options, name
Yes.
and delivery date.
Oh, wow.
But the
Okay.
problem is those can be manipulated and people already know the answer. So it's
Yeah,
not.
I was
fair
like, I
to-
think I might have to, based on a conversation I had earlier this week, I might have to recuse myself from this.
No, I agree, but for the vast majority of people, they don't know these things.
Yes, so I'm gonna recuse myself from that one, just to keep.
Okay, thank you, Matt. That was terrific. And
Good. Well, I'm gonna slide out of here and head down the hall.
Patrick, do you have anything else? I mean, we don't have you scheduled, and we have talked about the revenue boot up, the ramp up of 3 years. and a revenue over the course of that time between 10 and 15. Do you have anything additional you need to add in testimony on this, given that you have 3 members of finance present?
So Patrick Titterton, my fiscal office.
You want to come and join us, or do you want to?
Sure.
I mean, just briefly, because we have touched a little bit on it, but we'd love the fiscal note if we could get that from, I assume we have that. Oh, you're operating from it.
I just printed it out because I thought it'd be
Yeah,
handy
print
to
it
have.
out, print it in color. Oh, that'd be great.
I guess the question is just, what do you want to know?
I think we've heard from Matt that there's a 3-year ramp up and that the
Yeah.
robust, that it's unclear necessarily what the final robust revenue will be for the state once it's all ramped up. But you have a prediction of doing that over 3 years and a ramp up value of what?
Yeah, so Representative Barong is correct that usually we do see a ramp up over the course, usually 3 years. We've forecasted out for 2 years. Just the further you go, the more uncertain it can get kind of situation. But in the first year, it really is going to come down to how quickly DLL is able to get through this bidding process, release the rules, get through the bidding process, selecting the operators. I've had discussions with Commissioner White about that, or excuse me, Commissioner Knight about that. And the feeling is, by the end of the year, so kind of the assumption we used was, let's assume this gets going January 1. So basically a half year of revenue in the first year where there's a ramp up.
So fiscal year 24.
Yep. We forecast about $2 million, but there is that piece there. How quickly is the market rolled out? And, we can get people engaged in the market and start maturing it. So that for fiscal year 25, with that ramp up and having a full year, we estimated it's going to be between, it's about between 4.6 and 10.6 million. And that is a range.
4.6.
And 10.6.
That's a big range.
And there's a reason for that. So part of the process that DLL is going to go
I
through
have.
is negotiating the revenue share rate with the operators. They did add to the language that it has to be a minimum of 20%. So that's kind of the lower end of the range. But going all the way up to 50%, which I know there's been some expression of they feel good that they can get close to that range. It's something we see in New York and in New Hampshire have rates right around there, and they had a similar revenue
The
share.
sharing percent.
Yeah. And so that's something we've seen in other states, and that end of the range, which I think we probably tend to point closer to that number, is that 10.6 million.
Got it.
And
And the committee landed on, remind us what the share percent was.
so there is a minimum.
They have a minimum
it
of
can be
20.
no less than 20. And what it actually lands on finally will be the result of the bidding process.
Okay.
So they'll
So
they'll
some
negotiate.
operators will pay more so that they'll sweeten the deal and hope we'll choose them.
Well, my understanding is that, that they'll come forth with a bid saying, if we're splitting the market with X number of operators, we'd be willing to commit to
Got it.
this percent. So there could be some stratification there based on how many operators they would be willing to work.
So
with
that
to
is
share the
why
market
the
with.
number of operators is key. That's why your recommendation of 2 to 6 operators, I mean, not your recommendation, the Bill's recommendation of no more than 6 operators at the moment is,
Yeah, so it has in the language 2 to 6, and that came from the study committee, which Commissioner Knight actually
Right.
led.
right.
And so that was, and I believe Senator Ron Hinsdale was on that as well.
She
actually.
was indeed, as was Dick Sears.
Right.
So the fewer the operators, the higher the revenue share.
The fewer the operators, the more likely they'll accept a higher share rate.
Got it.
Yeah.
Even I, a former Ways and Means, can figure that one out. Okay. Anything else at this point that, because we're gonna probably come back. Anybody have questions about the revenue for Patrick? at this
Well,
point?
this is, was there discussion of what to allocate the revenue to? Like,
That's not,
counseling or not? I mean, sometimes don't
We
we
do,
allocate
absolutely.
revenue?
absolutely, that's in the bill somewhere.
So I know,
Okay.
as it is right now, in the first year, there is of revenues collected, 250,000 would go towards problem gambling
Okay.
and assistance with that. And the second year, it goes up to 500,000, and those figures were, I believe, what was recommended from the commissioner of DOL. I don't want to speak for her, but sort of the thought being that that's sort of what they would hope to have access to in order to, serve this population, anyone dealing with problem gambling issues. But the rest of it, the idea is that it's as it's set up right now, it'll go to the general fund through a direct application. Similar to, what's done with liquor proceeds.
Okay,
Okay,
and did we look, and I don't know if this would be in the fiscal note, but the increase in problem gaming because of it being legal?
that.
I don't know if
we're gonna
I
hear
can-
from the Department of Health.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I can speak directly.
Okay.
That's someone with more expertise would
Okay.
probably better serve
Yeah.
you there.
Okay.
Was there some mention in the study that smaller number of operators, as you know, would likely result in a larger amount, but were the studies done comparing the size of states? In other words, larger operators, a larger number of operators that had huge amounts of money in a state like New York would be very different than a single operator who has far less revenue in Vermont. Was there some belief that having one or two would actually make much of a difference in the state of the size?
Well, there was discussion that, because Vermont is such a small state, it'd be difficult for us to have a very open market, difficult for operators as well, to have a very open market like what we see in, Indiana or Michigan, where they have, 18, 20 operators. And, I think one of the guiding things that was looked at was our direct neighbor in New Hampshire. They're one of those states that are set up like you mentioned, and they, seem to be happy with how things are working. One thing that did come up was that when you're strict to very few operators, you might be restricting competition in the market. But I think that is something, DLL is going to go through rulemaking. They're going to be regulating this market, making sure that operators are not, engaging in predatory practices, not to assume that they ever would, but they would be involved in making sure that it's a fair and functioning market. So does that answer your question?
I think so. As I say, I just have a concern that even 6 operators seems like very large for a state our size.
It does, and yet the emails we're getting, you'd think that everybody wanted, endless numbers. Thank you, Patrick. I think this is great. What?
They just all happen to be the same.
They did, and thank you, Keisha. So I think this is good for right now, and we'll probably have you back unless we have additional questions right now. Have you back as we sort of hone in on what
I
we're
was
hoping to
planning
do.
on hanging out for a little while while you
We
talk
would
about
love to
this,
have.
so
Good
I'll
idea.
be hiding in the corner.
So
We
don't
love-
get in trouble.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Anyway, we love it when people consider SED a good place to hang out. I actually, before we go to the problem of gambling, why don't we continue on the visioning for this bill and move to Chris, if he's on. Kevin, yeah, you appear to be on, and Allison and Brianna, do you mind holding for a bit just until we hear from Kevin Cochran, who I think it would be good to sort of finish the setup of the bill before we go to the problems that we face. Does that make some logical sense? I hope. So, Chris, would you like to tee this up before Kevin testifies?
I'm happy to if you
Yeah, why don't you just tee it up and then Kevin will go to you.
Sure. So thank you, Madam Vice Chair, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Chris Rice, I'm a lawyer, lobbyist here in Montpelier with MMR. We've been representing Sports Betting Alliance for a number of years now, going back really to the inception of this
Yes.
issue a couple of years ago. Appreciate your work on the bill. Happy to see the bill moving forward. With you today virtually is Kevin Cochran, who's been through this journey for quite a while as well. He works for DraftKings, but he will be testifying before you on behalf of the Sports Betting Alliance.
Got it.
He'll identify who the members are of the Alliance and share with you some brief thoughts.
How many members, Chris, are members of the Sports Betting Alliance?
I'm aware of 4 primary members.
4 primary members.
It's DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, and Fanatics. There may be some additional entities that are part of that, but those are the
Primarily
keys that I deal with.
Terrific. Yes, I was trying to remember when we first, I feel like we've been dealing with this as long as I've been on this committee, which is 2017. So, and I think, Kevin, you have come and visited us here in Vermont. As I recall, you were at an event at the Vermont Arts
That is
College.
correct. Yes, Vice Chair Clarkson. I am a giant redhead, so I'm hard to miss when you see me in person. I'm about
You
6'4".
are, as I recall, rather tall.
Yeah.
That is true,
so-
but I remember you being very cheery. So it's lovely to have you. Welcome. And I think on that note, we will turn to you. And thank you. And take it away.
Perfect. Yeah. So before I sort of dive into my prepared remarks, I know that you all have had a bunch of questions. Go ahead.
Right. Have you sent us your prepared remarks? And if you haven't, would you be kind enough at some point to send them to Scott Moore, our committee assistant?
Perfect. I will work on that. They are bullet points right now, but I will get them fleshed out for you all.
Yeah, no, that's okay. They can stay bullet points. That's fine.
Great. So yeah, before I jump into my prepared remarks, I know that you have had a bunch of questions. I don't know whether it's easier to take them now or after I've sort of given my quick overview of the areas that we wanted to highlight today, but I'm happy to do whatever works.
I would encourage you to do the high level first and then dive into the specific questions we've had.
Perfect. Okay.
Frame up your interests and how you feel this bill addresses them and moves us forward and where you are.
Great. Thank you. Chair Rahm, Vice Chair Clarkson, and members of the committee. As I've already said, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Chris, thank you for teeing me up. My name is Kevin Cochran. I'm a Director of Legal and Government Affairs at DraftKings, and today I am testifying on behalf of the Sports Betting Alliance. As Chris mentioned, it is made up of 4 operators. That is us as DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, and Fanatics. At this point, there are no other operators that are part of the Sports Betting Alliance. We do often align with other sports betting operators, so we may sometimes be working with a larger group than just the SBA, but the SBA itself is limited to those 4 operators at this point. So together, our members advocate for regulated sports betting through a competitive model. And we've been advocating in this manner since 2018 with different variations of partners. And this all stems from when the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act was struck down by the Supreme Court, which allowed states to figure out the models of which they would like to authorize sports betting. Currently,
And
36.
when was that, Kevin?
I believe it
When
was
was
the
that?
Yep, I believe it was the summer of 2018.
Yes, thank you.
Yep. So currently, since then, there are 36 states plus the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico that have authorized some form of sports betting. So this will vary from online only, which is one of the models that's being discussed in Vermont, ranging all the way down to retail only, which is sort of only allowing wagering at brick and mortar locations. So as a quick overview, the SBA has been on record with this legislature on the importance of competition in the marketplace, including setting a minimum, which we would recommend to be at least 4 operators rather than the minimum of the 2 currently contemplated, as well as the importance of setting a statutory tax rate at a competitive rate. And just for the record, according to an article from 2022, the average rate is 19%. Now, maximizing revenue is an important foundation for the novel U.S. industry of sports betting, and so are critical consumer protections and responsible gaming features of the legal and regulated mobile sports wagering market. Having high quality, well-known operators in the state creates an environment suited to converting the pervasive illegal market most effectively. So with that in mind, on behalf of the SBA, I'd like to spend my remaining time of my remarks discussing the RFP process outlined in the legislation you are considering. In particular, we'll be sharing an amendment for consideration to Section 1320 of H127, and it's titled Sports Wagering Operators Competitive Bidding Process. These suggestions come from the SBA members' experience of applying and being accepted through the RFP processes in other states. And we believe that if these are adopted, they will help ensure that Vermont has the highest likelihood of meeting its policy goals of 1, establishing a robust sports wagering market that meets the demands of consumers, including providing responsible gaming tools and resources. 2, providing financial benefits to the state over the long term. And 3, helping stamp out the illegal market, as it's currently the only way persons in Vermont can place bets while in the state. And I think John Pappas, who is on the agenda, will talk about sort of potentially some constituents of Vermont traveling to other states, to other neighboring states to place bets as well. So we have 6 changes that we'll be sharing with you, but at a high level, the first one is really just talking about defining a clear process, which is consistent with what we've been advocating throughout this entire process. And for us, this also includes, to the extent that's possible, including specific time periods for application submission, application acceptance, and selection of operators if the bill is to move forward. And why this is important to operators is we are national companies. We are doing a lot of work in other states. So understanding when we would have to be able to pull our RFP bids together, and then potentially, if we're selected, move forward, the clarity and roadmap that could potentially be out there will help us to ensure that we have the best resources that we can to provide the best bid to the state of Vermont in if H127 is to move forward. The second change that we would recommend would be bolstering the requirement for operators to demonstrate how they plan to impact the illegal market. This ties into a lot of the policy goals that have been laid out in House 127, including in Section 1320 that actually talks about, one of the biggest points is reducing the illegal market and converting wagers to the legal market. These suggestions.
I just am going to anchor our committee members. That's on page 12, the beginning of 1320, which is what he's addressing, which is a subchapter called Sports Wagering Operators.
Thank you so much. Yes. So these suggestions would require operators to include, along with their player acquisition models, also information about their advertising and affiliate programs, and we would also include our promotional programs there as well. These changes also emphasize the speed to transitioning players from the illegal market. So it's not just that we want to get players away from the illegal market, but we would recommend that any RFP focus on how an operator can effectively and quickly start getting players from that illegal market to the regulated market, which in turn then starts generating revenue for the state. Third change we would recommend is just including when looking at an operator's experience to make sure you take into effect the duration of their experience in those states. So I believe the requirement requires that we would have to provide all the states of which we are licensed, and we would recommend putting the duration for how long we've been operating in those markets. The fourth change is going to be sharing an operator strategy toward commitment to Vermont to not only demonstrate sustainable long-term revenue for the state, but also to support long-term sustainability from operators for the state. Now, I know those 2 points sound really similar, but what we're focusing on is we would recommend that when Vermont, if they move forward with this legislation, is selecting operators, they select operators that can commit to the state for the long term and continue to show year-over-year growth, building out Vermont's regulated sports wagering market. The fifth piece ties into what I think we're going to hear more about, which is some of the responsible gaming features and what's in the bill already, but we would recommend that when applying through the RFP process, operators share information about their technology, because at its core, sports betting operators in the mobile space are technology companies. And we would recommend that operators describe how they use their technology to comply with the law, including geolocation, but also to help with consumer protections and responsible gaming. And lastly, we would just add a catch-all factor to allow operators to further demonstrate the integrity, sustainability, and safety of their sports wagering operations. That ends my prepared remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has. And I apologize, I have to let my dog in because it's raining. So right here.
So, and please send those up. Have you been working with Tucker to draft those up at all, Chris? Have they undrafted? They're just now 6 bullet points of ideas.
So Kevin has his testimony, which is separate. The language will submit later today.
Okay, great. As long as we do that, that is terrific. And we have John. Okay. Anybody have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious, and I don't know if you're the right one to ask this of, but thank you for your testimony and your suggestions. How much do we know about the illegal operators? Do we know, are they American companies? Are they foreign companies? Are they the same? I would expect they're the same as in other states. Can you, like, how many of them are there? Are there a few large ones? I'm new to this.
Sure. No, thank you for that question. And it's a very good one. I'll try to describe it as best as I can. The issue when you're dealing with illegal markets and illegal actors in those markets is the amount of information you get from them is not always concrete. But I will say at sort of the smallest level, there are likely persons in the state that are accepting bets currently from a market of people that they know. One of the sort of technology can be, both sides of a sword. And one of those issues here is that it is very easy if someone wants to run an illegal bookmaking service that they can get a white labeled website that players can actually go through and place bets online. They don't have the sort of deposit mechanisms that we have, but there's sort of a running account, a credit that you can keep track of how you are up or down with a local bookie, but it can all be done online now, similar to how the regulated apps work. On top of that, there are actually illegal websites that do accept real money and sometimes pay you out if you're able to win. And these are based all around the world. They're based in some Eastern European countries. They're based in the Caribbean. They're generally referred to as offshore betting operations. But they also prominently advertise with a lot of different podcasts and internet media. So the issue becomes that a lot of players that want to place wagers, they'll go to a regulated product, and for whatever reason, they won't be able to download the app. And that reason is actually because we can't offer our product in Vermont at this time. And then they'll find a website, they'll just sort of tick down the list, and they'll end up going to one of the really famous ones is called Bovada. And they'll end up at Bovada and they'll start placing bets, and they'll think that they're doing this legally, but they are in fact not. I don't have an answer for the number of operators that there are, but there are a lot. There are a lot of them. I would guess that there are at least over 100 of them that are targeting players in Vermont right now.
All right, and then just one other question: would banks be a source of information if they were allowed to share that information? Just in terms of deposits and money changing hands?
Well, that would be
Or
very
is it-
micro. That would.
Well, I'm just wondering.
I know,
If
Yeah,
that's a way to get.
And then they have to report it.
Kevin, do you want to take that, or Patrick, do you want it? I mean, I don't think it's been Patrick. Kevin, do you have an answer to that?
I can give a partial answer. I can't speak on behalf of a bank, but I can speak on behalf of my experience in knowing a little bit about how illegal wagering works. when you make a transaction with your credit card or debit card, the bank has a merchant category code, right? That you have to use. So it's like, is it a retail establishment? Is it something else? I know that previously, and I have friends that had gone through this back when sports wagering was not legal, fully legal in some states, or when poker was, or when people were playing internet poker online, when they would get deposits or make withdrawals, the company that they were going through, the offshore operator, would categorize those transactions incorrectly as a way to mislead any sort of financial institutions from recognizing that it was not a legal operation. So they wouldn't put online poker, they would put telecom services or something like that that may not raise an eye. But that's the best answer that I have, and that's purely anecdotal. I can't speak on behalf of the bank.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
This is a real quick comment, slightly aside to the initial questions, but there have been a lot of stories of when people actually do try to go withdraw their funds from a website like Movada, that they actually have a lot of difficulty getting access to those funds. When they, they'll send them a check in the bank, go to the bank, they might say it's not a real check or something like that. So people just have issues of actually getting their money back after they deposit it in some cases.
And that's one of the.
Oh, I'm sure that's one of the problems, but I was just wondering if the financial industry was a way to get information or possibly to.
Well, I think maybe our toughest way to get information.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
so thank you. Any other questions for Kevin before we shift to how we? Right. Thank you, Kevin. And Kevin, are you, just one last question on the ramp up. We have JFO ramping us up over 2 years because it's hard to forecast beyond that. The ramp ups for you in other states, the 36 other states that I assume you have some experience with it, is that sort of average 2 to 3 years ramp up to do the job of both attracting legal bettors and attracting the people who are betting in illegal markets?
Yeah, that's a great question, and sort of the longest market that DraftKings has been in has been about 4 years, which is New Jersey, and we've continued to see growth in those states, but there is definitely a ramp up period. I think 3 years makes sense and is a good barometer. It could go a little bit quicker or a little bit slower depending on how the market itself is fleshed out. For example, I think if there's only one operator, the lack of competition and the lack of a drive to acquire players might ramp the market up slower than if there were more operators, because the goal really is to transition the players from the illegal market. And the best way to do that is to offer them promotions, make sure that there's advertising from different people. And we also sort of describe it as, I describe it as sort of a restaurant to a certain degree, where if you go to a restaurant one time and you have a bad experience, you're gonna go to a different restaurant at that point. And then if you don't like any of the restaurants around you, you're just gonna start cooking your own food, which would be players going back to the illegal market. So that's sort of why we would recommend for competition in this state, because it will really help transition players quickly, and it will increase the time of which the market is truly robust.
And while you're with us, and maybe you aren't exactly the right person to ask, I guess I have 2 questions for you while we have you, which is the penalties that we've ramped up the penalties significantly. Are those similar to other states that you operate in, or are they still modest?
I have not reviewed in detail those penalties. What I can do is I can work with Chris, and as the SBA, we can evaluate that and get back to you on that.
Okay.
From how they're described. Oh, go ahead.
No, that would be interesting. And then the other one on the advertising, you just briefly mentioned advertising. I just don't know whether we have limits on advertising? This is mostly looks like we're limiting advertising to younger people.
Yeah,
but-
traditionally how that works in other states too is, for example, college campuses, we will never be advertising on college campuses. We won't be putting information out there in student newspapers or certain things like that. If we're going to advertise, we will be doing it to a population that is able to use our product. So that's really how we try to focus that.
Right, it's fantasy sports is big with young people, but not this as much. Partly because they just don't have the money. Or at least we hope they don't have money. Thank you, Kevin. Anything else? Any other questions? Great, more to follow. Thank you very much for getting us started.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, this is good. So I think now we'll shift. Actually, again, before we get to the problem solving, I think John Pappas, I saw that you had joined us, and you are our geolocator, which is terrifying, but all those times we press don't allow doesn't seem to affect any amount of data that's collected. You know, when it says
we can chat about that.
Well, John Pappas, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm actually not here to testify. I'm here just to enter my picks for the baby pool.
Oh, that's the baby betting is a serious one. We have date and name, and oh my gosh, we have all sorts of things we could.
Well, you
I didn't know
with
about
the name John, assuming if it's a boy, but well,
So, John,
well, thank you so much, Chair and members of the committee. As I mentioned, my name is John Pappas. I'm the Senior Vice President of Government and Public Affairs for GeoComply. We are a global leader in geolocation, identity verification, and fraud prevention technology. We're licensed by regulators in every state that has approved online gaming, and we provide critical compliance functions so that regulated sports books that are operating online are trusted and secure and safe for consumers. We deliver unparalleled technology that provides oversight not only for the operators, but for the regulators as well. Each day we process an upwards of over 40 million geolocation transactions. And to your point, I think it's really important to note that the data we collect is strictly for compliance purposes. We never sell, share an individual's geolocation data with outside third parties. It is simply used to validate a player's location so they can either place a bet or be blocked from placing a bet. And since our inception, we've successfully tackled the challenge of restricting betting within a state border or other geographic regions, even down to a city block or even a building. Our technology enables online operators and regulators to meet the demands of federal law, such as the Wire Act or the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, and the states that choose to opt in or opt out of online wagering. You may be familiar, as you already are, with geolocation services for such consumer applications like Google Maps or Uber, or placing a coffee order at your closest Dunkin' Donuts. But the main difference between those open door tools and our compliance grade geolocation is how we interrogate the data to ensure that it is trusted and secured. We don't simply rely on IP address. Everybody knows what an IP address, that's 1980s technology. It is the easiest, most spoofable technology out there. So we have to dig deeper. We have to detect and block the use of proxies, VPNs, remote desktops, virtual machines, mock location settings, developer tools. The list goes on and on. We have a full-time team of more than 250 employees across the country that are monitoring and ensuring that our systems are updated. Every time our system approves or denies a geolocation transaction, it has undergone over 350 analytical checks to verify that only legal bets are permitted. Now, if I can do a little bit of show and tell, I'd like to be able to share my screen here. Let's see if I can successfully do this.
Yeah, great.
Here
I
we
think
go.
you can.
If people are able to see my screen, what I'm showing you right now is live transactions. I'm sorry.
Massachusetts with a lot of dots, a lot of things on it.
Yes, exactly. So this is the state of Massachusetts, which, as you know, recently launched mobile sports betting in March of this year. And what you're seeing here are live geolocation transactions in real time. So these are real-time transactions of us verifying players' locations within the state of Massachusetts at this very moment. The dots that you see, the white dots, are what we would call an iOS device. So that would be your iPhone or iPad, things powered by the Apple operating system. Green dots are Android devices. And the blue dots, which are very few here, would be like a Mac or a PC. So your laptop or your Mac computer. Most sports betting is done via a mobile application, so either an iPhone or an Android, and I would say a much lesser amount. And then the cool red dots are blocks. What we'll probably see, if I zoomed out, you'd probably see more blocks throughout the country. And sometimes you'll see a block within a jurisdiction, and that's based on what I shared before, is that if a player was running a VPN or on their phone, they had what we call a fake GPS app running, we would be able to identify that and notify the player that they need to disable those services in order to legally bet within the jurisdiction, because their data could be compromised. So we take very seriously that we are able to accurately pinpoint a player's location so that they can place the bet right up to the border of New Hampshire, of Massachusetts, but also if they cross over, that they're not able to place that bet. You'll notice that the closer you are to the border, the more often you'll be geolocated, because what we don't want is somebody logging into their app and then setting up their bets and then walking across the street, literally in some states where you can just walk across the street and then place a bet in the jurisdiction that's not permitted. So we have to geolocate people more frequently based on their proximity to the border. And we have rules engines that examine that and ensure that we are not going to allow for wagers to happen outside of the permitted jurisdiction.
So it's been fascinating in this short time to see how many have been caught in Maine and New Hampshire and Connecticut. So it's very interesting to see this. And how restrained Western Massachusetts is. How few bettors are in Western Mass.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we're also, it's a little early in the day. Typically during an NFL Sunday, you'd probably see a lot more activity throughout the state than you would on, a Friday, a Good Friday, nonetheless, at 10 a.m. in the morning.
So that's why there's more restraint. Are you ready for questions? You have a little bit more.
I actually, because you asked a question about blocking from other states, I actually do have some data specific to New Hampshire specific to Vermont that I'd love to show the committee if you didn't.
We would love that. But while we're looking at this, I guess one of my questions is, if you are a Vermonter, so you go by location, not the state that you're registered in as a player. So if you're a Vermonter and you're in North Carolina playing golf, for example, you couldn't place a bet using your Vermont account. You'd have to be you'd have to be using the North Carolina jurisdiction.
Correct. That's exactly correct. Yes. So we would identify that you were in North Carolina, and depending on the mobile operator that you're using, they would have either the same app or a different app that would be for each state, and you'd have to log into the app for the jurisdiction in which you are in.
So the jurisdictional revenue is protected.
Absolutely. It's location based, not registration based. So we don't even know. We have no personal details. We don't know the name of the individual. We have no mailing address, credit card information. That's none of the data that we are collecting. We have no PII other than their location at the time of them engaging in the activity of wagering. So when they have the app open, we're never tracking location. When the app is closed, it's only when the app is open and they are in the process of engaging on the app and perhaps betting.
Right, so please go to.
Yeah, just a couple questions.
Yeah,
So-
Wendy has a question.
Thank you. So your data is basically a yes or a no, and if it's a yes, they pass through. You're like a gate. Would that be an accurate analogy?
Correct. We do provide an individual with, or operators would provide an individual through our logic, a indicator why they're being blocked, right? So if it is an instance where someone has they don't have their locations setting on their phone enabled, we would get a notification that, hey, please, put on your location settings so we can get a more accurate location for you, because the data we have is insufficient to allow you to wager. So they would,
Right, okay.
and then clearly if there's a malicious attempt, we could proactively block a person from being able to access the site entirely, because we believe that it's a malicious attempt, a device that we know based on our billions and billions and billions of data points over the last 10 years knows that device is somehow associated with fraud or fraudulent activity. We would be able to block those as well.
So you do keep a history of the requests or searches?
Yes, of course, we keep a history as required by regulators in various states to have it. Sometimes the data is useful for law enforcement purposes in terms of investigating a potential financial crime or a credit card chargeback or some other instance where a consumer was defrauded or an operator was defrauded, and our data can be helpful in providing a better picture into what the activity actually was.
Okay, that's interesting. And then just one other question. Are there other companies who do what you do?
There are.
Okay. Thanks.
And you have a question? Yes.
Randy.
Oh, sorry, Randy.
What data do you maintain?
Only the geolocation coordinates.
So when you're looking at something that may potentially relate to fraud, it's solely the coordinate. It's nothing that leads back to the individual or user of the device that is involved.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Yeah, we have no PII, obviously, the location at the time of wager. So it could be they were in their car, it could be they were at their home, it could be at their work, it could be they were at their grocery store or wherever they were. So we would just know the location. We have no individual information based on our data and the data that the operator has, where they do know the player because the player has to be KYC'd and registered their account. Then they would have that data. Yes.
And the actual location data that you have, how would a third party get access to it? Must
They
it be
would-
through a report process or otherwise?
We are licensed and regulated in every jurisdiction in which we operate. So we have a direct relationship with the state regulator and generally with state law enforcement. We would respond to a subpoena if subpoenaed, but in terms of third parties other than for the purposes of an investigation, we would never share data.
Are there any such things as civil subpoenas that have been used, let's say in a legal action of one kind or another, in which your data is being sought?
I'm not familiar with that ever happening.
Okay.
In other words, are you able to say it doesn't happen, or you're not sure whether it happens?
I'm certainly not aware of it. It's something I probably would be aware of. I've been working with the company since 2018. And that's just nothing that I've never heard of something like that cross our desk.
Randy, they moved to Ann.
Sure.
Ann?
No, I was just wondering, you're a private company. Are you local regulators license you, but I'm just wondering, is there a body of regulations, federal, who supervises you?
Well, our products are tested by the major testing houses that are also certified, GLI and others. We receive those certifications. Some states have their own testing labs, so our products are certified by the state's testing labs as well.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
No.
Anything else, John? Oh, you wanted to talk
Oh, yeah,
about.
I did want to share some specific data regarding Vermont, if you don't mind. I'll stop the share on this and open up another screen if you don't.
And just while you're doing that, where are you geolocated right now?
I am geolocated at my home office in Washington, D.C. When I say my home office, I mean my bedroom.
Good. The home
familiar
office
with that.
sounds good.
It's fine. Does he have a cat degree?
Yeah, right.
What screen are you seeing right now? Does it say Vermont players seek out
Vermont
legal?
players seek out legal sports betting.
Great. Make sure I've got the right.
It's the right committee and the right date.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know if I've got the right one up here. Excuse me while I stop my share. Okay. Same.
Yep.
I apologize. All right, is there
Okay.
another?
Yeah.
Next
This
slide.
one
Okay.
has analysis slide,
Yes.
breakdown
Wonderful.
of the state.
Yep. So what we're going to show
Right.
here is just some of the activity that we're already seeing in Vermont. Players, sports bettors, and Vermonters are actually familiar with geolocation and geocomply because when we see a Vermonter try to access a legal site in another state, we're the ones telling them, hey, you're unable to place a bet while you're located in Vermont, and that you would have to go to a legal jurisdiction. So since the beginning of this year up through April 5th, we saw 120,000 geolocation checks from within the state of Vermont. And these came from over 17,600 unique player accounts that we identified within the state.
Sorry, say that one again. 120,000 geolocation checks from Vermont.
Correct?
For how many?
17,600, over 17,600 unique player accounts.
Unique players. Wow. Jesus, crow. That is an interesting portrait.
So,
And
and what
most
the map you see here is kind of a heat map to show where the density of those transactions are taking place throughout the state. Not surprisingly, you'd see more volume near more populous areas of the state.
And do you have any notion, probably you don't, but I don't know, how many of those bets were then moved to the illegal market?
Well, we do know a few things. We do know when we would see a player who's geolocated, and I do have a slide on that. We'll go to that. We'll get to this, but we do know when a player is geolocated in Vermont, and then in a reasonable velocity, a reasonable time frame, they are then geolocated in either Massachusetts or New York or New Hampshire. Then the assumption there is that they got on their phone in Vermont, were unable to place a bet, and crossed the border into one of the legal markets, and were able to place a bet there. So we do see that. We see that 100 times a week at least in Vermont. So we know that there's a lot of activity. What we don't know, and which I think is probably from a public policy standpoint more of a concern, is that are those consumers then turning to the illegal offshore market where there's zero protections for them, obviously zero economic benefit for the state, and there's no accountability. So Unfortunately, as I think your previous witness testified, it's impossible to know the activity to a certain degree, but we do know that there are dozens of offshore operators that are actively targeting Vermonters and literally tell them that, hey, you bet here, it's completely legal, it's completely legitimate, and here are the ways you fund your money, and if you do fund your money, we're going to give you a bonus. They give the appearance just like they would if they were a legitimate operator. And unfortunately, for most consumers, they don't know the difference between a legal site or an illegal site.
Thank you.
So what we saw during the NFLC, go ahead, other questions?
No, I just thought Wendy had a
Well,
question.
Yeah, and you might be ready to answer the, just looking at the dots and it was probably not representative of the total, locations of bets, but I'm just curious, it looked like there were a lot of bets in the, tourist areas and ski areas. And I'm just wondering if it's possible to find out just generally the proportion of folks who live in Vermont versus folks who are visiting Vermont who are betting.
Yeah, that wouldn't be possible for us to know their primary residence. However, I would say that if you have individuals who live in New York or all the way down in Washington, DC, and we have a sports betting app on our phone and we're visiting Vermont and it's during the NFL season, the ski season, and we're there and we can't place a bet, that's lost opportunity because that revenue would be going to Vermont. It wouldn't be going to where that person is has their account created. They would have the ability to have a Vermont-based sports betting account and be able to place their wager while they were in Vermont.
Right. So it just helps me to know who they are generally. Okay.
Yeah.
John, you have anything else for us? Because we have three
Yeah,
more
well,
witnesses. And we have an hour
I
and five.
apologize. I will just
No, it's
just
very interesting.
interesting data points. Prior to the launch of Massachusetts, we saw the majority of login attempts going into New York regulated sports betting operators. And since the launch of Massachusetts, we see a far, much more evened out, and nearly 40% of all attempts are going into Massachusetts now.
Right.
And then finally, here's some data showing you what we were talking about earlier about where we identify a player near the border in Vermont who logs in, and then 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later, we see them in a legal jurisdiction also logging into that same device. And we see hundreds of these activities on a weekly, monthly basis.
So just to go back to Randy, or I guess all of our question, which is, if you don't collect PII, how do you know it's the same player going across this line?
We do know the device. So we device the device. Yeah,
right.
We never know a player. When we talk about individuals, we assume there's somebody holding the device, but it's really the device that we know. We don't know the person that's holding the device.
Okay, so you know the device, but not the person. Know the by device. Okay, great.
Great.
And
well, happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
Great. I think we probably will have more, but I think we're going to switch gears. And I think, Wendy, I don't know when I think you'd like to do cleanup at the end. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. So Allison and Brianne, I think, Brianne, why don't we start with you to frame up the national picture and the Vermont picture within the national picture, maybe, and then move to Allison and Nicole.
Okay. Thank you so much for having.
I believe we've had testimony from you in the past.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me back and having me again today.
It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Just introduce yourself for the record, and we'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Sure. So my name is Brianne Dora-Shawal, and I'm here on behalf of the National Council on Problem Gambling. I did send over a deck of prepared remarks. I'm not sure if the committee has them. I'd be happy to share my screen if that would be helpful.
It's online. Do you need, would you like to just present or do you need them, because Scott can share them with us on the screen, or you can just present your presentation?
No, I'm happy to go through it. I just wanted everyone to have it for the record. So, like I said, I'm with the National Council on Problem Gambling. We're the national advocate for programs and services to assist problem gamblers and their families and their loved ones. I really want to emphasize that we are neutral on legalized gambling, and we have been in existence since 1972. We have chapters in 35 US states. There are 2 states that are also working on forming chapters as we speak today. Vermont does not have an affiliate chapter, but we aim to work with governments, the gaming industry, regulators, legislators, the media, and the wider community to ensure we're doing everything to advocate and create the best policies and procedures to protect individuals from gambling-related harms. First couple slides just talk about the general landscape of sports wagering.
May I just interrupt with a question, which is, you say you're neutral on legal gambling.
Yes.
Is there no behavior differentiation between legal and illegal gambling?
And that's exactly right. So we understand that harm can exist both in the illegal and the legal market. Our job is to just ensure that this public health issue gets the time and attention that it deserves from, a policy standpoint.
Okay, thanks.
And there are an estimated 11,629 individuals in Vermont that are currently struggling with a gambling problem. And according to a 2021 survey of problem gambling services across the US, Vermont ranks 26th out of the 42 jurisdictions that do any type of per capita investment in addressing problem gambling services. Your per capita investment was 23 cents, and the average is 40 cents. We commissioned I'm sorry, was there a question?
Well, 2 things. So you're saying that Vermont right now invests 23 cents on the dollar to address the problem gambling?
Yes, that's right. But the national average is a 40-cent per capita investment, so you're roughly half the average.
Yeah, no, I got that. I'm just curious about that because we haven't, from my understanding, we haven't spent any of that money effectively. So we will look forward to hearing from further witnesses on this.
Of course, and I would just like to say on that point, though, the money is of course important, but then having research in order to help you inform the best way to allocate it is equally as important, right? You want that money to be best spent to hopefully prevent and also reduce the harms that exist. And I think that segues very nicely into something that we have commissioned for several years now. It's called the National Survey on Gambling Attitudes and Gambling Experiences, and it focused on looking at sports wagering and fantasy, so skill-based behaviors and attitudes. We looked at problematic behaviors, something known as positive play, and it showed us 2 really important things. I believe that'll serve as an important pillar for the discussion today. The first being that people overwhelmingly felt that the government should be doing more to help people with a gambling addiction. So I think that seeing that as an important component of any legislation also directly correlates to what the people of Vermont are hoping to see. And the second thing it really highlighted for us is that problematic gambling activity amongst sports bettors and skill-based is drawing about 2 to 3 times the rate of problematic play compared to other forms of gambling. So we didn't look at non-gambling participation versus sports betting. We looked at gambling from, say, casinos, bingo, lottery, and compared that to problematic tendencies within sports betting and skill-based, and saw that there was almost twice the rate of problems. So having really comprehensive preventative measures, both from the operator standpoint, which Kevin spoke to, and about some of that technology that's deployed in operations, as well as from the public health aspect, is really key here, because you're very quickly going to normalize gambling just by nature of mobile sports wagering through the culture. And so being really at the forefront of how do you mitigate those harms that we know are impending is really key. And one of those key components leads me to funding. And previous iterations of the bill, we did see a proposed percentage of gross gaming revenue. It had been suggested in previous testimony by myself and in others, 2.5% should go for the research, prevention, treatment, and recovery. Now, that being said, we have also suggested that it should have a floor. So to see those two numbers as described by the sponsor at the beginning of the hearing, the 250,000 and then the 500,000, would be our recommendation, as it should be 2.5%, but not to be less than. Our concern also stems from the fact that not only is the 2.5% been removed from the piece of legislation, as far as we can see, there's only funding allocated for 2 years. And really, as long as you have legalized sports wagering or gambling in general, it's vital that you also have a funding mechanism in place to prevent and treat problem gambling. So we would urge you to reconsider that appropriation of only 2 fiscal years to be in perpetuity. In the slide deck that I have provided, I have highlighted how other states have designated a problem gambling funding. You do a wonderful job of prescribing the Department of Mental Health's oversight and addressing of problem gambling, but there is one component that seems to be absent, and that has to do with research. And I think that it doesn't take too many examples here to highlight the value that research really affords from a policy standpoint. Vermont's never really had a significant prevalence study done. So the estimates I'm giving you for how many people are struggling could be conservative. They could be overstated. We don't know. And what we have seen since states have legalized sports wagering is that there is often a significant uptick in the amount of helpline calls that the state receives. In fact, actually earlier this year, Ohio launched, and within 30 days, they saw over 227% increase in calls. Now, some of that could be new problems that have arisen. Some of that is just that there is a greater awareness that help and hope exists, and those people had been struggling in silence before, and now they were reaching out for help. But there's really a lot to be said about having an evaluation and a research component to give you a better understanding of your baseline, the impacts that sports wagering will have on the problems within the greater community, and then, of course, the efficacy of the prevention and awareness and treatment programs that you need to deploy within the state. Speaking of the helpline, we did note that there are several mentions of helpline, both in the sports betting and the fantasy components of this bill. However, it doesn't actually explicitly call out for the national problem gambling helpline. Given the very nature, as you heard from the Alliance and DraftKings earlier, they are in so many jurisdictions now, and a lot of the advertising is national in nature, and it doesn't help the individuals who might need to get access to a helpline if they have many different helplines listed at the bottom of an ad. So having one national helpline be authorized for all advertisements on the platforms, on the websites, is really key to ensuring those that need access to help aren't having to search very hard for the helpline number. My next slide speaks to that annual research agenda. I don't want to belabor the point. Yes.
Brianne, may I just ask, do you, is one of the things the National Council, does the National Council operate a helpline of its own?
We do. So, and then it gets rerouted to a local call center. So that way you're directed to someone within your state to get local resources. But we do. It is a helpline, text, and chat, and it's 1-800-GAMBLER.
Got it. And is that a revenue source for you?
Well, we're a nonprofit, so this is how we fund it through private
Every
contributions.
nonprofit needs earned income.
Yeah, so we work, as I noted at the start, with operators such as DraftKings and FanDuel and BetMGM. And through their membership dues, we are able to offer this 1-800-GAMBLER across the US.
Great, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, and
Yeah,
actually,
Wendy.
just to follow up, so if somebody from Vermont called that, would someone answer there, or you just
Of
reroute?
course, yeah. But right now, the offerings of what we can direct by way of clinicians and subsidized treatment and meetings is limited in scope. And as you invest in problem gambling services, those can only increase, which gives us the opportunity to offer more options that meet people's needs where they're at.
So you do, not you personally, obviously, but your
No, I
organization
used to answer the helpline in Massachusetts, yes.
Oh, that's fine. Okay. So you do call, but then you also can send people to our helpline. Is that right? I just want to
Yes.
understand.
If we had one that was worth much.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can have,
So you're like a giant 911. You dispatch to the location that, so if it came in for a Vermont call, it would dispatch to the Vermont, whoever is handling the Vermont helpline.
that's exactly right. And
They would answer, which is different.
Yeah,
from
they
what you're
answer it
saying.
and then they would send it to.
Yeah.
Vermont.
So that's, okay.
yes, and that's exactly how we'd like you to view who we are. We're a giant 911, and the more we can streamline this instead of having a very fragmented approach, right? It was noted earlier, is this participation local residents or tourists? Well, there are going to be instances where people are enjoying the lovely state of Vermont. We love to vacation there, who might find themselves in need, ensuring that there is one universal helpline that can direct people to help and hope where they exist is really key. Having this very fragmented, I'm sorry, I can't help you, you don't live in Vermont approach isn't going to work.
But you can say we can dispatch, we can direct your call to someone who can help you in Vermont.
That's exactly right. And so having all advertisements require this national number, having your platforms and your websites and your fantasy providers all streamline and advertise this one number helps us better serve people and loved ones who are in crisis.
And does that happen in the 36 other states of jurisdictions that have this?
Unfortunately, right now, no, ma'am. We have several states that are having their own helplines, and it's leading to a lot of confusion amongst the consumer base. And the advertisements are having to fit in, upwards of 15 different helplines on their ads to ensure that they're meeting their compliance obligations. And unfortunately, the people who need that type of information are the ones that are losing out here, because if you're in crisis, no way are you looking for that size 2 font, the appropriate helpline at the bottom of an ad, correct? So
I guess I'd ask how many of the 36 states do use 1-800-GAMBLER?
I would say at this point, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I would say 3/4, if not more.
Okay,
1-800-GAMBLER is a new initiative that was brought on a few months ago by NCPG. We had been using a different helpline, but a lot of New York, not New York, but New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and other very large states had already used 1-800-GAMBLER, California. And so it made sense with its well-known presence for us to adopt it. And we migrated over to 1-800-GAMBLER. So quite a few at this point do.
Okay, so other than the money and the loss of the percent in this section 1340 of our bill, have you had a chance to review that section? And do you have thoughts other than wanting to reinstate the 2.5%, which is I think what I'm hearing?
I have an outline of the bill right here. Sorry. You're talking about 1341, ma'am?
I think is that the section that we begin to deal with this, as far as I can tell?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so your main concern is that we have lost the 2.5% of the, and any other concerns with the bill as it is now? Because we have about 5 more minutes and we're gonna have to shift to the Department of Health.
Yeah, a few other things. We would encourage you to consider including education as part of your general curriculum into this legislation. It is an emerging trend across the US, Michigan, New Jersey, New Jersey, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland all have pieces of legislation after legalizing sports wagering because it becomes so pervasive within the culture to put it into health class or a financial literacy class. We'd encourage you to consider doing that right from the start so you don't have to go back in future years to address this. We think that a lot of the responsible gambling considerations are very strong within this piece of legislation. However, to Kevin's earlier point, I would encourage, there's a line that says that the operators have to disclose what they've done to combat problem gambling. I would say that should be teased out a little bit, is that there are certain jurisdictions such as New Jersey and Colorado that require certain things like player behavioral algorithms that are deployed on the back end. And the question should really be, is that type of technology going to translate over into the Vermont market? Or is it only going to happen if the Vermont regulatory agency requires as such? There are so many different approaches, so having that overly prescribed would be advisable.
Have you sent us, in your remarks, have you sent those concerns with us?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And the last one being involving self-exclusion. Self-exclusion and having a state-run program, which is delineated or called for here in the bill, is a wonderful thing. And having that also feed into the fantasy or skill-based program is also wonderful to see. Streamlining is really key for success. I did note, though, within your skill-based language, there's a lot more articulation around exactly what is expected from the operator, especially by way of informing the customer about next steps. We would encourage that the legislation also require the same safeguards to carry over for sports betting. And there is one little concerning line that says that the fantasy operators could also operate their own self-exclusion, and we would encourage against that because you would just want to keep it state run.
Do you have, and you have cited that in your letter to us?
I have only talked about the general principles. I'd be happy to call out the exact line that we have concerns over. That would be helpful.
We have a short time to deal with this, and
sure.
So as much specific help or the specific ask with specific spots would be really helpful for us.
I'd be happy to send over the few red lines that we have. I would just like to end on, I think that you have all done a tremendous job of considering and examining the potential harms that will inevitably come for some individuals by legalization. The things that you are discussing and proposing today, we believe would do a very good job at addressing those from a holistic standpoint involving your regulatory agency, your Department of Mental Health, and the private industry stakeholders, all who profit bear the responsibility of addressing these harms. And we think you have done a really solid job. So thank you for your time and your consideration again. Your commitment to addressing this. We're very encouraged by what you have drafted here today.
Oh, good. Thank you. Well, we appreciate you sending us your tweaks and your ideas, and we certainly hear the 2%, 2.5%. And thank you very much. And will you stick while we have the Department of Health weigh in and the commissioner?
Of course.
I think we're going to. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And are you geolocated in DC?
I am. Yes, ma'am. Well, right outside of Washington, DC.
Okay, great. Yes, geolocating here. No wonder we have so many flights to DC that are on a regular basis. Okay, Allison, I think we're going to turn to you and Nicole. Nicole's in the room. Allison's up on the screen. And we would love to have you weigh in both because my understanding, and this is from a while ago, my understanding is that we have farmed out the problem gambling challenge and that it's not been particularly effective. So we would love to hear how this bill makes it more effective and what how you feel about the bill and what we can continue to do to improve it. So Allison, take it away. And then Nicole, if you have anything to add, we'd be happy to hear from you.
Great, thank you. For the record, my name is Allison Crumpf. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Mental Health. And the bill does charge the department with utilizing some of the funds to ensure we're addressing any problem gambling. And so we've been preparing for any anticipated increase in need. The current funding in Vermont has provided some limited access to care and very limited, somewhat non-existent prevention and education and awareness. So that's what we're looking to really bolster in this bill. So we've been partnering with the Department of Liquor and Lottery to really, provide and following some of the National Council guidance, utilizing that as best practice. So we'll be really interested in what is put forward in their RFP for an operator, because I think, as you heard, there's a lot of measures that can be put in place that really help mitigate risk. We're particularly interested in, ensuring that those who are most vulnerable, namely youth, that we have good ways to ensure that they cannot access that until they're of appropriate age. So those are some of the things we'll be, working with them and reviewing that RFP. And then I think really the other piece to this is the funding for the mental health prevention supports. I do want to say we've been really encouraged that the bill allows for some upfront funds. So when you just have a percentage, we have to wait for that revenue to come in, and we're expecting a need to have ramp up time. So this bill does provide that funding ahead of time for the percentage piece. Yeah,
I don't have it. I mean, the appropriations, I guess, are here we are. So you would get a 250,000, is that right? And 500,000 in 25?
Yes.
Okay, so that is until we have revenue in lieu of a 2.5%. That is a direct appropriation. That means you don't have to wait for revenue to come in. And you think you could do significant education, maybe not research, because I did hear Brianne talk about us wanting to do more research, but I'm not sure how much we can do on that amount of money. But with this amount of money, you'd expect to set up whatever program we're going to set up to address this problem in a more substantive way than we're currently addressing it.
Exactly. And I would love for Commissioner Knight to talk a little bit more about the funding percentages. I will say for us, the language previously and what had been recommended was a 5%. And when you do the math on the expected 10.6 million, the 5% would get us 530,000. So we were hoping to stay in that range. And what we liked about the percent is that obviously as utilization goes up, then funding for mental health supports would go up. So again, that's something that I think will be talked about later. But yes, this funding that would be given to us this year and next year would go towards building the elements that we know can help prevent problem gambling. So it's awareness, prevention, and then access to therapeutic treatment. And so building awareness on things. Yeah.
And education, who's taking on the education challenge?
So I think that's interesting. We speak about education, but I think in a little bit of a different way than was just suggested in terms of embedding specific curriculum in schools. That's something that we would need to talk about. That's a larger effort that would involve more than the Department of Mental Health. When we say education, we are talking about some financial literacy, but not necessarily changing curriculum in a school. So we would be doing that through PSAs and messaging. We'd be talking about, building awareness that it's better not to do sports gambling alone, that you should be telling somebody that you trust what you're gambling. There's things that you can do to prevent. We'd be building awareness and education. This current bill doesn't speak to changing curriculum in schools. That's something we would need to talk further about.
Well, we're just getting ourselves started. And so we have many years to address all the additional things that will crop up in the course of legalizing this. So can you help us feel confident that shifting sort of jurisdictions for this problem gambling, that your outfit that the Department of Mental Health will actually do the job, as opposed to how we've had it in the past, being farmed out to the Howard Center and having it not adequately? I mean, because I think problem gambling isn't just sports betting. We have a gambling system already in this state. We have legalized lottery, and lottery is so. If we've had inadequate help for problem gamblers with the lottery, how can we have confidence that going through the Department of Mental Health is going to ensure that we're really going to address this issue, educate people, and build awareness of the challenges we face? I assume we're going to do both for both lottery and sports betting. I mean, there's sort of.
Yeah, I think, because Vermont doesn't have brick and mortar gambling, we certainly were very low when it came to how much investment was being made into addressing problem gambling. This does shift that issue. It brings all of the needs to the forefront. And for us, we had to do some research on what is the best way to approach this. How do you do prevention? And now we have funding dedicated for it, but more importantly, we have a statewide shift that's forcing people to attend to the issues. So I would say, we at the department, I feel like we do fully understand what the risks are, what works to prevent, and we also know what are best practice to treat if somebody does develop a gambling issue. So we've now got this partnership following best practice from the National Council. We know what types of trainings our therapists in Vermont would need. And I feel like it's pulled us into another network of people who can show us how to do this well and look at the other states, because some of them have done it well or not as well.
Keisha, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Allison. I have been really interested over the course of the work on the study committee around data collection. And even if you just look at collecting data on how the response was going, spending between $100,000 and $200,000 on a hotline, buying into a hotline, the data showed that maybe one person was using that every 6 months, or it was really, really low usage. $150,000 is a lot of money, to help maybe one person. And so even if it was a position instead in the past, was Department of Mental Health kind of completely out of the loop on that process? And how would you be monitoring the value of what you're paying for going forward? And also, I eventually look at Massachusetts. They have a very robust data collection system, so they can really demographically and geographically target pockets of communities where there's more problem gambling occurring. Is that something that you all could look into, just to sort of piggyback on Massachusetts and take lessons from there?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And I do think Massachusetts is a place that we could look. The contract with the Howard Center wasn't something that we had oversight of. And I think, others could speak to that. And also, again, it wasn't built off this system that we're about to set up. This is now going to be a system where there's legal sports gambling. And I think that really changes things when it wasn't regulated before. And so this allows that sort of intentional foresight into what we think we're going to need. We're with you on the hotline. That's something that we're talking about. We don't expect the volume of need to warrant a 24/7 run in state hotline specific to gambling needs. So we do plan on utilizing the resource from the national gambling line, and then the money would be used to make sure there's coordination from that to resources. So it could be 211 for housing or financial. It could be 988 for any suicidality, but not to stand up something that, given our low population, we don't necessarily foresee, at least in the near future, that would warrant that level of investment.
Thanks. Wendy.
Hi, Allison. I have a question just about how you see a new potential challenging situation being set up while we have currently a pretty significant substance use disorder problem. Do you see those? Like how does the health department respond? I've heard from folks who are involved in helping people with substance use disorder really be concerned about adding gambling to the mix, because it's another potential addictive behavior. So how do you see those efforts working together?
I understand those concerns. I think I'm well positioned to answer this question. I've worn the hat of suicide prevention for the Department of Mental Health, and I have a weekly meeting with the Department of Health where we talk about the overlap between suicidality, opioid addiction, and any substance use and misuse. And what we've been talking about a lot lately is to combine our efforts and ways to reach people who are in need. And in many ways, having somebody who might be going through some problem gambling issues, it's quite likely they're also having other issues in their lives. So this is a great space to say, okay, we might now know who is vulnerable. There's other ways and other messaging to reach folks, and directing them to financial literacy could also assist with their suicidality. They are interconnected. Vulnerable populations are vulnerable populations. And I would like to see us, and we are starting to do this more, particularly around suicide and substance use, combining some of our grant opportunities, our federal funding opportunities, to come at the population more holistically, instead of saying, well, this part of you might have suicidality. They're linked, we know that. And so this is an opportunity. We would stay really connected, and we'd have to on this.
And just to follow up, so funding is great, but then you have to have the staff, obviously, and that's a problem for all agencies and employers. So how's that going?
Yeah, and I would say this funding isn't going to pay for direct service because the services are billable. And so we would see it as a professional development opportunity. So existing people who do counseling work and therapy work, who would then add on to their professional skill a gambling problem, certification and training. So we wouldn't have to go and find a new person who just did that. At the same time, I'll be frank, we have access and capacity issues, and that's something that we will still need to address. The hope is through some of these helplines like 988, the suicide lifeline, and the gambling lifeline, that gives you somebody to talk to immediately when you're in crisis, and that's a guarantee. So we think that that'll be really helpful to have that infrastructure while we work to bring back up the amount of therapists who are available in the state.
Okay, just one quick.
Okay.
What's the level of your vacancy amount?
Oh,
I mean, what's
fair. The whole agency is having some challenges.
I
in
know,
this regard.
that's what concerns me.
Well, I think so. I can't give you the numbers for across the state, private and public. I can tell you we've had a lot of vacancies in the designated agencies. We've been down about 1,000 positions. However, not all of those are on the mental health side. Some of them are for developmental needs. So it's an issue. You'll see if through this year, there's a lot of initiatives out there to do recruitment and retention. It's being really targetedly addressed. And so also we're just relying on the PAs for this.
And we're working on housing, so.
Yeah,
Trying.
we're trying, we see the confluence of all these challenges in this committee. So, thank you, Allison. You have anything else? Because I think we're going to turn to the commissioner. We're running out of time and I think we need a good amount of time with our commissioner. Nicole, did you have anything you wanted to add? No. Allison, you have anything you want to finish with?
No, just thank you for asking the questions and, you know, just
Right.
know that we are deep into this with Department of Liquor and Lottery and I do feel confident we've got a good plan going forward.
Good, we need one. So that is good. I think, yeah, anyway, less on that. More to follow. Thank you very much. This is terrific. Keisha, anything else before we say goodbye to the other Allison?
No, just I'm breaking my own rule, but I just texted Senator Campion just to put a pin in the conversation about addiction and agency of education. It's obviously coming up with tobacco and other things. So I just want to make sure we have a joint understanding of how to handle vice issues and prevention.
Great minds. Great minds are clearly thinking alike. I was going to do it after committee. So thank you for taking the lead on it. Okay, thank you, Allison. Have a lovely weekend. Thank you, Nicole. And Wendy, I think let's shift to you, my dear. We have a lot.
Hi. How you doing?
Oh, good. Yeah.
I like how you're.
Oh,
Right,
God,
gotta
I have
match
to.
your
I didn't realize.
So Wendy, we
Today's
have,
Lyme Day.
we
Yes,
have
it is.
a lot.
Hi. Yes,
What?
she was noticing that my sticky
Oh my
notes
God, you're so
matched my
fully
jacket.
aboard.
I did
know,
not
it's
realize
amazing. It's
that.
very impressive.
Frightening. Okay, how fabulous.
Happy Friday.
How utterly fabulous. So,
Okay.
my dear,
Yes,
we
yes.
also had questions that came up
know.
yesterday, which I think let's say.
We are. I'm going to send you written testimony clarifying some of the
And-
inaccuracies that were discussed in this committee.
Right, this
gonna
is
clean
referring
that
to our
up.
miscellaneous
Yes.
booze bill.
Yes.
So let's,
Yes.
because we're gonna have you come back and we'll also be
Yes.
addressing it, but if you'd send us the
I
responses
will.
to that,
Yeah,
that'd be
we'll
great.
clarify that.
Charles was on the job.
Yes. Charles is on.
And, but let's today
Yes,
focus
yes,
on
please, on
the
sports betting.
sports gambling and sports. And
Thank you for having me.
it
For
is
the
good
record,
to
Wendy
have
Knight,
you.
Commissioner of the Department of Liquor and Lottery. So let me I sent a memo last week kind of articulating some of the financial stuff. Let's talk about.
Sorry, I am
It's
not
okay.
sure I
It's-
have that.
It's the
Anywhere near me,
memo,
but we could pull it up, right?
memo dated March 29th. And I will, I'll just talk about it. It's
That's- if
basically
you
a
just talk about
follow-up.
it, I can,
When I was here a week or so ago, when we were kind of
Right.
reviewing things, I mentioned there were two things. One is the problem gambling funding. And you heard Allison articulate that, the deputy commissioner, that we'd like a 5%. And this is what I had articulated when I was here with you
Right.
previously. I sort of walked you through where it started from. There was the recommendation from the National Council on Problem Gambling that we heard in the Sports Betting Study Committee of 2.5%. Somewhere along the way in the House, they put a floor in. And then, so there was
Then they pulled that.
then they pulled the 2.5% completely out. And as I mentioned last time, there is no funding beyond FY25. And I think that was just an oversight. So our recommendation is that you bump it up to a 5%, right? So our testimony in House Government Ops is that if you increase the funding percentage to 2.5%, you eliminate the floor. The floor is an artificial funding
you
mechanism.
are fabulous.
Thank you. We would prefer that you put the 5% that sustains it year over year. As Deputy Commissioner mentioned, it grows organically, and this is something I talked about in the House and previously. So we would request that you replace the $250,000 appropriation in FY24 and 500 appropriation in FY25, and no appropriation thereafter, to just make it a 5% of the sports wagering revenue that the state
So,
receives.
Hearing both
Yes.
concerns of
Yes.
needing immediate cash and not waiting for revenue to come in,
Correct.
would not an FY24 appropriation of $250,000 makes sense so that you actually have cash on hand to do something?
What I have said, and is that the department, now we're getting into the Vermont lottery problem gambling. And we've
Yes.
already identified, and I've spoken about this, that the way we have it set up now with the contract with the Howard Center is ineffective.
Right.
And that's something I identified in the
Right.
fall. And I started to talk with my colleagues in the Department of Health about how can we do this better? Because we have $250,000 in the Department of Liquor and Lottery budget. And then we have a contract with the Howard Center, which is very reactive. It's not proactive. There's not that public service, community awareness of what responsible gaming is. And that's what Allison talked about. This is a great opportunity, this regulatory framework, to combine those. And so that's what we've been talking about, the Department of Liquor and Lottery and the Department of Mental Health, is combine the problem gambling. So we,
It obviously has to be combined.
of course.
It's all under one umbrella. But I guess my question to you is, or a clarification, is that, are you saying to us that you have the money, the cash on hand to get us launched for this ramp up of 2 years before we have consistently any 5% of revenue?
So what I would say is that for the first year of operations, right, FY '24 becomes really 6 months.
Right,
We're not
half a year. We're looking at half
half
a
a
year.
year.
for FY24.
right. So what the department has right now is $250,000. And what I've articulated, yes, in our budget, is that can be the seed money.
Okay, so in fact, we don't need cash on hand necessarily for FY, if your budget goes through as requested.
That's already built. Yes.
Well,
Yes, of course. Yes.
So you have 250. What
Correct.
about the following year? I'm just looking at a 2-year ramp up. I'm being.
Correct. And if you look at the JFO projections for the second year, now remember the second year is going to be a full year of operation.
We're waiting for we'll get our JFO.
Yes,
They're
the
in
fiscal
here.
note says
Yeah.
second year is $10 million.
Right.
And as Allison pointed out,
5%
5% is going to be 530,000. So I'm merely articulating that the floor isn't necessary. It's okay if you want to keep it in, but you need to add the 5%. You need to have a way to grow the revenue for the problem gambling.
Got
And my preference is that you would just put 5% in and eliminate the floor.
So Randy, what we
Floors.
heard before you came in is that that the commissioner has the first year money on hand. We had heard that they needed one of the reasons it was appropriated with a hard cash amount was that they didn't want to wait for the revenue to come in. But in fact, they have the cash on hand to get started with the education awareness.
The public awareness.
The public awareness piece and the education
players,
piece, which is broad. I mean,
Correct.
high school's just one
What
piece.
was the source of the money?
We have it in the
Heard
Department
about
of Liquor and Lottery budget. We've
In
had
the
it for
budget, okay.
years already. It's the $250,000 for problem gambling. I inherited this. I don't know why it ended up.
I know.
We have the revenue, so I understand why we're paying for it. I don't know
The history of how it got
correct.
there. to be
So what we're doing is the department and the Department of Mental Health and the Department of Health, we're creating a really sensible, organized approach. And we have the funding now if we pass the sports betting bill, then we will have the framework and the funding to really contribute towards problem gambling, both from sports betting and.
And you're proposing that rather than a flat amount, that you use a percentage figure going forward.
That's correct.
And would you have that on the basic happen for the first year, covering startup in the first year? You have on hand sufficient money that you think would equal the 5% that you would have gotten in.
Correct. We already have
obviously it will ramp up.
250,000.
So they have
For the
amount
first
there.
year.
That's fine.
Okay.
But
So I think we've got that.
The other thing I will mention,
Are you
I'm
okay?
sorry.
Well, just the floor. You don't want the floor.
I don't think it's necessary. I think
Yeah,
I don't think you should fund it artificially. I think you should fund it in a sensible, organic way, right? And as Allison pointed out, the idea that the administration has is that as utilization increases, i.e. revenues increase, then you will have that funded through the percentage as opposed to the floors.
Okay, so you don't think it's
I
necessary?
do not think it's necessary.
Right. That sounds like it is.
That's what
Okay.
what would 5% be, let's say, in year 3?
It depends on the revenue. So.
Right, based on your estimate. best
Well,
estimates.
the JFO estimate for year 2 is up to $10 million. So 5%, we've done the revenue share. If you do it a minimum of 20%, 50%, then you're looking at over $500,000
Which is what.
for the
hard-
second year.
Which is what the hard number was in the bill.
Correct, correct.
Okay, great.
So the only other things I will just talk about in terms of the problem gambling is, remember, right now we have a number for the Vermont Lottery, we have a number for the Howard Center, and we have 1-800, gambling, that's a national resource. Remember, we're talking about mobile sports betting. So I would caution you from putting too many details into what that problem gambling program looks like, and rely on the Department of Health and their expertise, along with our sports betting consultant, that really understand how to set up a problem gambling program for sports betting. You're not going to have a 35-year-old NFL player. He's on his phone. He's not necessarily going to call in a 1-800 helpline. There might be a chat mechanism. So I would caution you not to put so much specificity, particularly a 1-800 number there, because there might be other technologies that the operators have and that the Department of Mental Health will become aware of, et cetera. So that's my caution there. And
Essentially, you would simply have the department, somebody, whether it be the Department of Mental Health, you would set up a program, a plan to address problem gambling. And the question would be whether or not we would want to have something come back to us to understand what that plan is.
That's it. Great minds are thinking alike, because I'm thinking, hey, we have a report back instead of.
Correct.
We asked for a report back on the setup of the problem gambling program. So, great. I think we hear you on that.
yes, and the research. And I think that I'm sorry,
Brianne
Brianne.
talked about research, and it would be great to do robust research, but we have to get this set up.
Correct. And
But we want the data collection.
Totally,
As
exactly.
we begin,
how much time do we have?
we have until about 11:20, 11:25.
It's about half an hour.
Okay, all right, good.
I'm
So,
hoping I don't have to go up to Commerce to testify on firefighters. Not that I don't want to, we need to get this done.
so yes, I also feel very confident with what you have in this bill that the House has presented. There are a significant number of consumer protections. It's a good framework, right? And so one of the things that we talked about last year when we were talking in this committee before your time, Wendy, but when Senator Strachan was the chair, in case you remember this as well, you have a certification body, and the gentleman from GeoComply talked about this. So in the bill, we require operators to be certified. That GLI, Gaming Laboratories International, is the international certification body for operators. So in here, we are requiring that the operators become certified. So there is a layer of international gaming certification in addition to our obviously
That's already in
regulatory.
the bill.
Correct, it's already in the bill. So the way we have envisioned this, the Sports Betting Study Committee, and what the framework you see in the bill and what we talked about briefly a week or so ago, is that this is going to be done via procedures, just like we do on the Vermont Lottery. And it's going to be, so it's a much expedited, we need to set it up by the end of the year. So the board, we will develop procedures, the board will approve them, we'll have a couple of public hearings, and then it will allow the department to send out an RFP. You've heard Allison talk about the RFP will have all of the responsible gaming elements. There's some elements in here that have, what will be in the RFP. We've have a sports betting consultant that's advising us. So we'll develop that RFP, we'll send it out. The operators will submit, and then we will review the bids just like we do for all of our other contracts. This is what the agency does really well. We contract with liquor agencies and lottery agencies and we have international companies that we work with on the lottery side.
So we heard from Kevin Cochran that so obviously I assume we will share with you his points on the RFP. I believe he had several things he would love to add to the RFP. So we will, as soon as we get that from him, we will send those to you for you to weigh in.
Okay.
I think think that's right.
So two things I will talk about right now is on page 26, and I
Yes,
think I
keep
alluded to
anchor
this
us
last
as we
time.
get to know this bill.
Page 26, it's the advertising. It says the department shall include in its contract with each operators, and we talk about provisions for making sure that we're not targeting the under 21.
Just one second, because we're looking at a different, we're looking at the.
Oh,
unofficial,
sorry.
so the
I'm
page number
sorry,
might
I'm
be
looking
different.
at
I have page 26. here.
26, I'm looking at the as passed in the house.
Okay.
But what
we're
section
looking at as
is
passed
it?
by the House. You have the official one, we have the unofficial one, which
Right.
happily has none of the red stuff.
Oh, here.
But if you just give us the
Give us
section.
the section.
We might
The one before procedures. Hold on.
Okay. We are under section 1340
1302.
on page 26. We've got. a whole lot-
1302.
It's advertising is what we're
1302.
looking, right?
Section 1302.
1302. I feel like that is very early on.
All right.
It is. All right, so it's our page 5. It's our page 5. Does this look right?
Department of Liquor and
No,
Lottery
hold on.
Authority and Duties is 1302.
Yeah, that's not my 13. Give me one
Oh.
second. It's this, we're looking at two different versions. Just give me one second,
Okay.
please. I will find
No worries.
a little further.
What's the title?
It's about advertising.
Advertising.
Oh, that's under, I saw that.
Exemptions, process.
Oh, here's procedures.
No.
Is it next to procedures?
Consumer protection, it's after, here, it's under fair and truthful advertising, it's sections 1332, it's on page 22.
No, that's fantasy sports. Give me one
Oh,
second, please.
how about-
Sorry. Oh, my God.
Here's authority to review and approve types of wagers and categories. Oh, no, that's not it.
Maybe it's not, maybe it's, this is, I don't
Here,
know
you
why
know,
it's not in
oh,
this
is
bill.
that,
I'm looking at the bill you're looking at.
yeah.
So, okay, you know what? We're gonna deal with this another time
Okay.
because we can't do this, right? We have to look at the same bill. And we're
Yes.
not, and I'm not gonna waste time. I'll come back and talk about what I want to talk about with advertising. But right now I do
You
want
could
to.
talk about it generally and when. we
I know,
find
but
it.
it's better when we look at it together, the language.
Okay.
I just really would rather do that if that's okay.
Yeah.
It's silly to try to look through these right now. What we have in front of us is a sports betting operator fee. And this is what I talked about last time, and it's in the memo that we have
That
done
you
some
have sent.
additional research.
This memo, which is
Correct.
on our website.
And we would ask that the operator fees be changed based on our additional information. I gave you the schedule of our proposed change. Basically, additional research that we have, particularly with our sports betting consultant, is that it would require more oversight and regulatory work on the department's behalf. Thank you. If we have more than one, as incrementally our work might increase as the number of operators increase. And this is a question that Chair Kornheiser had asked, and her assumption was, well, if you have 2 operators versus 6, aren't you going to be doing more work? And I didn't have enough time or information at that point when it would pass the House, but we have since done it. And so we definitely, based on the research, think it will be more money. And so we've created a schedule that makes more sense because we will have additional oversight, input and legal fees, et cetera. So that's what this new schedule
I
represents.
would assume more operators, more oversight.
Correct.
Okay, I thought you said.
I'm
okay.
sorry if I said
No,
that.
that's
No,
okay.
incrementally would increase.
Because your numbers go from 550 to 1.9 million.
My numbers, correct. So my numbers go for one operator, the administrative cost for the department we calculated is 550,000. That's what's in the budget, our budget for sports betting. So we basically took a 50% incremental increase per operator, and that's the schedule that you see here. So that's why if there were 6 operators, the total fee would be 1.9 million. Of course, that would be divided by 6 so that it would be a little less money than 550.
It would be less money for the operators.
Correct, as the number of operators increase. But the total amount of work and the total amount of operating fee should increase based on the number of operators.
And that's where the floor of 20%.
No,
No,
that's something completely
altogether.
different.
Okay.
This is just operational fees. So there are two revenue streams that the department will collect from the operators. One is the revenue share. That's essentially the tax. That's something that we would negotiate in the competitive bid process. And that would depend on how many operators. For example, New Hampshire did a competitive bid process. They ended up selecting one operator and they have a 51% or 51% revenue share. So we would negotiate that. The expectation from the Sports Betting Study Committee and what's in this bill is that the number of operators ideally in Vermont would be 2 to 6. And that's what it says that we would look to select through the competitive bid process.
And so we're leaving it with the department to
Correct.
choose to make a decision
Correct.
about 2 or 3 or 4 or 5.
And
or
it
6,
depends on
and
the-
giving you the latitude to make that decision.
That's correct. It gives the department the ability through set up the we take this bill, set up the procedures, we develop the RFP, and we send that out. And depending on what we get in terms of submissions, just like we do with a standard RFPs and contracting, the state does that quite well. They have a standard contract that protects the state. We negotiate, and then we would select them based on what the submissions looked like.
And if you had full confidence that 6 operators could function well in this market, that may be where you might end up.
Yeah, depends on what we get in terms of the bids, correct.
But
The
so
minimum revenue share in the bill is 20%.
that's what I thought.
So
With each operator, that's with each operator, isn't it?
The
If we
minimum,
chose 6, if we chose 6 operators, the minimum share would go down, the share would go down, the number with the larger number of operators.
yes, that's usually how it works.
Okay, got it. So the number of operators increases your cost of oversight, but it decreases their percent of revenue share.
Yeah, and that depends on again, it depends on the bids we receive and it depends on the contracts we're able to negotiate. What this bill basically says is that I must ensure that my contracts that I negotiate give the state a revenue share of at least 20%.
Okay, so Madam Chair, I just want to confirm
Yes.
something which is kind of probably obvious. So this is the bill passed by the House. So your numbers are total. So the per operator fee, say for the 2 operators, it's 825,000 divided by 2 is the number that we would put instead of the number that's in the bill. Because it's a per operator number in the bill.
Yes,
I just want to double check.
What page you on?
14.
So, and I think also you're asking us at some point to
Correct.
less
This is-
specific.
Because that's the total that it
that's
costs
the total,
the department
correct.
or agent.
Yes, that's okay. Yes, the department,
Yeah.
correct.
Okay.
Exactly. So
Yes.
I started to do the
Inverse
math
of
for
this.
you. No, it's just this is the total fee. It's
Oh, yeah.
basically saying
No, that's important to have.
550 is the base of administrative cost. So if that's your base,
Yeah.
then you're saying, okay, for each additional operator, we're assuming a 50% increase in the amount of work and the cost. Correct. So this is the total. If you divide 825 for 2 operators, I've suggested 825 is the total. If you divide that by 2, it's 412,500.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to
That's correct.
make sure this is
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay,
All right. Do we have Charles?
Charles
is-
seems to have found
He's
this.
great. He found it. Thank
What
you, Charles.
page?
You're awesome. Okay, page 8. It says that the department shall include in its contract with each operators. That's what I wanted to talk about. This pertains to advertising.
Little g,
I may
Yes.
have given you my
top of the page.
Your copy, what? This copy?
No, of your memo. I don't have it anymore, and I think I had it next to this. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we're looking at page 8.
Keisha,
little g. So-
Wendy's memo's on our website, because we can't just quickly pass it to you. We wish
have
we
it.
could. Great. Goodbye, Patrick. Thank you.
Bye, Patrick. Okay. Now I need to find my. Okay, so G, little g, provision that prohibits the first one is basically saying, we want to make sure we're not advertising to the people under 21, because this bill doesn't allow sports wagering for folks under 21. That's fine. The second one says, the requirement that the department and its operators shall cooperatively develop an advertising plan. That is not necessary. What we're trying to do in our contract with the operators is require them to have an advertising plan, right? So if you got rid of the department and its operators shall cooperatively develop, you simply just say that our contract will require the operators have an advertising plan, which shall include strategies to limited unwanted advertising aimed at people 21. We are not going to develop cooperatively an advertising plan with the operators. We're going to require them to develop an advertising plan, which then we review to make sure it meets our specification and our requirements.
So Tucker is not with us, but so we would love to ask you to coordinate with Tucker on your language changes so that we can then
Yes.
come back with something. So that is just strictly the operators shall develop.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's clear that you have to approve it.
Correct, yes. So, and then the third one, it says a cap on the amount spent by the department. Again, this is something that was articulated in the sports study committee. One of the state's interests is to ensure that the department has strong authority and can be responsive. This is a very evolving market. My point on this section is it is not necessary. This is something that the department will set up through its procedures and in its contracts with the operators. We've seen this, Allison, Senator Clarkson, Madam Chair, we've seen this on the liquor side. If you put too much information in the bill and the industry evolves too fast and we can't keep up, it becomes very problematic because we have bills that are not keeping pace with where the industry is moving. Sports betting is very new. It's moving quite fast. This to me is not something that needs to be in statute. It's something that we will address and respond to properly through our procedures.
Okay.
That's
That's
what I
good.
had.
And
Just a
maybe-
question.
Yes.
So I can see where a cap on the amount spent by the department would be problematic, but you don't want a cap that you would determine on the amount that the operators spend on advertising?
So
Or
the-
you're saying the contract would include a cap?
I'm
or some
saying,
sort of-
yeah, I'm saying allow the department through the competitive bid
monitor.
process to figure out what the best solution is. The reason this is in here, okay, is that we hear, and we heard this from testimony from another state, they allowed so much advertising within the state. Now, advertising comes out of the bottom line of the revenue. They allowed so much advertising that there was zero revenue from sports betting the first year. That's what we're going to avoid. Now, New Hampshire talked about this in their testimony. They have certain restrictions on advertising. It's not in statute. They figured out what they want to limit their operator. They have one operator. And that's all I'm saying is this doesn't need to be in statute that you're requiring the operator to have a cap. It's something that we can address in the procedures and in the contract.
And so again, in your language, you might share with Tucker, might you like to clarify what the department will come back, to keep us updated or, whatever you'd like to replace it with so that we stay on top of the evolution of this industry. And we
The
could
issue
have,
about cap came from the study that created this. Is that correct? The study that the legislation was based on
Yes, so this, we did not have an advertising cap in the sports betting study committee.
Okay,
This came from some discussion in the House.
Okay.
okay, that's where I was.
That
Just trying
did
to
not
understand
come-
the source.
Correct.
Evolution,
It did
the
not.
evolution of the cap.
Yes, it did not come from the
Okay.
sports betting study
So-
committee.
We,
And do you know what their rationale was? Was it the fact that they didn't want too much money being spent on advertising to prevent the problem that you described?
I believe so, yes, correct. And I also believed that some of the problem was, or some of the concern was, if you have so much advertising, is that going to incentivize people to be gambling too much?
What do you think about some sort of just statement that advertising should be minimized or something like that?
I think right now you already have your, we're saying that we don't want to be advertising to the under 21.
Okay,
And I think that that's sufficient. That's addressing,
Okay.
like, okay, you don't want under 21
you
year
don't
olds to
want
be
focus.
gambling. You don't want a youth to be gambling. I think there are lots of provisions in here. And again, I realize I'm the regulatory body. So your impetus is to put things in legislation, and my impetus is to ask for less things in legislation, because I know as a regulator, it becomes very complicated to be managing businesses. Like, I'm a regulator that manages businesses. I have to work with the lottery and the liquor, and now the sports betting. Those are very changing,
right.
evolving businesses. So I'm asking for the ability, which is one of the things that the Sports Betting Study Committee had recommended, that you allow the regulatory body to do its job.
And totally understand, and I can see why you would want flexibility. Because you will have to respond to things that we can't even think of, right? Because people are very creative. But I think it's our role is to set the overall goals. So
Right.
the goal is less advertising and.
Well, that may or may not.
Well,
The goal
is
is
it
to
the goal
maximize
generally
state revenue.
fewer?
So,
Well,
I think that's
Without doing a lot of
Correct.
harm in the process.
correct. So one of the
Okay.
goals that's articulated in here by the General Assembly is that I need to be maximizing revenue in the contract. Maybe one of the ways to maximize revenue is to make sure that there aren't all of these, free bets or advertising. I don't know, but you've already articulated is the goal is to maximize state revenue.
but not just, that's not our only goal.
No,
Our
but
goal is to minimize harm.
Correct,
So those can
Correct.
be opposite.
Correct.
Because the fewer people who gamble, we're
Correct.
gonna have fewer problem gamblers.
but we
Maybe.
have significant measures for consumer protections and problem gambling in here. We have significant, protections around advertising to the 21. So all I'm articulating is, to your point, the General Assembly in this bill has articulated its overall goals. And so that's on the department to,
But
So-
to go to our senator's concerns here, which is where I said, when we're gonna talk to Tucker,
yes.
we might come up with, and it may already be in this bill, and but a report back with an evolving industry. We want to also be able to stay on top of all
Understood.
the issues that we've articulated so far. So I think we want to have a also robust report back
Mhm.
mechanism on all the things that we're concerned about, and all the things you're concerned about, also we're
Mhm.
concerned about together.
Yes,
And this is one of them.
correct.
Okay,
Okay.
Yes.
why don't you keep going, because we only have about 5 more minutes.
That's all
That
I
was-
have. If you have any
all.
questions, the
Perfect
House
timing.
did a really good job,
So welcome back. Any questions so that's it? Those are your 2? You're fine with the bill other than that?
Yeah, I just identified, well,
Oh, sorry, Keisha, did you ever, sorry, I'm forgetting to look up.
No, it wasn't a question. It was a comment, and I know Senator Cummings had to be out for other bill issues. But and 3 of us are on finance. I feel pretty strongly about the 5%. I feel like with a lot of our vices, we've moved away from having a percent like tobacco, go to cessation, prevention, awareness, et cetera. I believe it was taken out in the money committees of the House side, but I think we have to decide as a committee if we're gonna try to fight for a percentage for mental health and problem gambling. Yeah.
I completely support you, and I think that we and missed some of that conversation, but I think that I'm confident that we have the money on hand up front to address the early stages of how we finance this with the Department of Health, Mental Health, and DLL, and I would agree. So I think that that's helpful, and I showed Ann.
Department or your mental health, your agencies? I mean, does the Department of Mental Health run problem gambling, or is that just?
They're being given it with the designated, I mean, it'll be involved the
I
designated
would
agency.
like to make sure that the money gets to the designated agencies.
It's in there.
It's in there.
Yes.
Because
the
that's where
5%.
people walk through the door.
Yes, it
Right.
goes to the.
Well, we
Department
need
of
them
Mental
to
Health.
walk through the door. The problem is they're not right now on this issue.
What we're advocating for is that there's not the floor, there's a 5%, and that's what Keisha's speaking to, that properly funds the Department of Mental Health for their problem gambling fund or program that they're gonna set up.
Okay.
Correct. So, Madam Chair, the three things that I have mentioned was the operator fees. I'll make sure you have the correct numbers. The 5% that we're advocating and no floor for the problem gambling, and I will give you some language of rent with Tucker on this advertising cap and making sure, Senator Harrison, that we're addressing your concerns if we
Right.
take this language.
Just stating the goals, I think
Yep.
would be really helpful.
Yeah,
I will do
right.
that.
So other than those changes, I think we're getting, because we are wanting to move this bill so that you have revenue to deal with as you build your revenue foundation. We're just wanting to make sure we get this bill moving so that you can move on the
I appreciate that,
RFPs.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I think we will look at that language if we could next week.
Yes, absolutely. I'll get it. to you.
And I think unless anybody has anything else, Nicole, you've got something? Okay, Chris? Good to go. I think then, oh my God, we've got 8 minutes before the Senate floor.
You can take a breather.
We're gonna take a deep breath and adjourn. We will see you back